So tools required: straight circlip pliers, 3mm Allen key, worm remover, and C-spanner. This is to remove the worm from the bearing. Step 1, with 3mm Allen key, remove inner part of bearing. There are 2 grub screws. Once grub screws are removed, the C-spanner will be required to tap loose the inner part of the bearing. Inner part of the bearing now loose. Inner part of bearing now removed. Next step, remove the C-clip from the shaft. C-clip removed. This will allow the worm now to be freed. Using worm removal tool, wind out the worm. Once the worm is removed, there will be 2 washers still inside the chamber, which must be left. To reassemble the worm, there are 2 bearings and 4 washers that must be assembled properly, including a retaining bush. Okay, next step, we need to put the bottom bearing into the shaft, so placing a bit of grease and having the bearing between the 2 washers, we slide that into the bottom of the cannon first. Yeah. Bottom of the bearing. Okay. Step 2, replace the gear, making sure it lines up with the keyway and tapping it slightly so it is seated. Looking down the shaft casing, you can see the washers and bearing located in the bottom and the side of the gears now protruding. Okay, next step, just place a little bit of engine oil on the bottom of the shaft. Having too much grease creates air pockets and doesn't allow the shaft to seat properly. Insert shaft into chamber and using the tool, shaft tool, wind in until it bottoms out. Giving it a couple of turns to make sure it's seated properly. And there we have our shaft into the chamber. Please note, if winding in and it becomes jammed or stuck, do not continue to wind in, simply back it back a couple of threads and then wind back in. By doing this, you'll avoid crushing the gears. Next step, we assemble the last part of the bearing, a bit of grease, and sandwich the bearing between the 2 washers. Using just a bar, we're able to locate. So with a special tool, We just push down the washers just to make sure it sits sitting flat. Next step is inserting the brass bush, just by coating with a bit of oil, just to insert into the shaft. And next step, our circlip goes in using our tool, squeeze, put it away down, and it will locate itself into the groove, which is on the aluminium casing. This will stop the worm from winding all the way out during operation. To ensure that the C-clamp is seated properly, it must spin once inserted. If the C-clip is not spinning, it means you'll have to remove it and make sure that it seats properly into the groove of the bearing or the housing. The shaft is now complete, and it is now time to fit the inner part of the bearing as per the removal procedure. Bit of anti-seize is a good idea to put on the thread, just to make sure that it doesn't cause any issues, and just slightly by hand just wind it in all the way until such time as that it bottoms out. For the last part of it, just use a bit of an Allen key just to make sure you get plenty of leverage and able to wind it up nice and tight. Now, by using the C-spanner on the lugs, it will allow us to tighten it up with a bit of a tap with a rubber mallet only, just locking the inner part of the bearing. Always wipe down the surface to make sure there's no foreign objects or matter located on the threads. Next step is to reinsert the two grub screws using our 3mm Allen key. Grub screws now lock this inner part of the bearing into position. There are two grub screws. Once both grub screws have been replaced, this part of the cannon or the bearing is now complete, ready for assembly back onto the major housing.